Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. So today on the show, I'm very excited to welcome Melissa Lohrer. So Melissa is the CEO and founder of Waverly Ave Consulting. Nice to have one of my favorite New York streets in your name, which is an independent consulting business built for modern agencies, rethinking the traditional agency model and giving owners a runway for growth.
Yeah.
After spending 13 years working inside agencies, Melissa decided to start her own business to redefine what success means in the creative world. Waverly works closely with owners and consultants to intentionally build better businesses, setting them up for seven-figure success or more on their own terms. So, Melissa, very good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. I'm excited for our chat today.
Yeah, same here. So to start out with your journey a little bit, can you talk about that? How did you get started in the agency space and how did you land in this crazy little niche of ours?
Yeah. I mean, the truth is getting into the agency space was a total accident. I graduated college with a business degree and, I never quite saw myself in a corporate environment, just imagining like wearing a suit every day and sitting in a cubicle, just something about that. I was hard for me to picture. So, I was open to exploring all different avenues of business. I went on interviews for finance companies and consulting, and something about it just, I felt like I was pretending to be something I wasn't. And I had an opportunity to interview for a receptionist position at an ad agency. That was my first kind of step into the creative world. And I was like a kid in a candy shop. I remember walking in and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And there was so much creativity and energy. And it just felt so different from some of the interviews I had gone on in more corporate positions. So I took that job as a receptionist. That was my first step into the world and long journey through 13 years of holding lots of different titles and responsibilities from an account person to stepping into biz dev and then ultimately becoming head of growth. And again, like starting my own business was a total accident. I was completely burnt out after 13 years in the agency space, which I think a lot of people can relate to. And I needed to kind of take a little bit of a career break. But as someone who's also creative, you give me space and I'm going to build and create. And so I had about a month off after resigning from my last agency role. And all of a sudden, all these ideas started coming to me of things I wanted to build. And at the time, I was working with a career coach, which was also a very kismet story. She had posted on LinkedIn, hey, I'm leaving my corporate job. I'm extremely burnt out. I'm starting to coach people. And it was the same day I had, I think, resigned. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to talk to this person. And her name's Amanda Baudier, and she's incredible. And she was really instrumental in showing me that entrepreneurship was a path I could pursue. And then the rest has been trial and error, build it and figure it out as you go. And it's been the most incredible journey from the beginning, from my first job all the way to now. I think I've had so many incredible adventures. If I had a set plan for my career, I never could have quite mapped this out. So it's been such an awesome ride.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. And it's funny because we've had CMOs of companies like State Farm or Levi's on the show, and I kind of forget what that's like, where it's like, oh yeah, you have this product and sure, there's changes, things update as the times go on, but it's like selling the same thing over and over. And then in the agency world, a lot of people have fallen into that world because of either consciously or subconsciously, they change a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we build agencies or work with clients that are building agencies now, it's almost like so much of the effort's going back to standardizing and making things less chaotic and more like every other product, so there's just a lot of kind of irony to that.
Yeah, I definitely am a builder by nature. So when I get out of building mode and I'm maintaining something, I've lost interest. It doesn't feel as exciting to me. And when I'm working with agencies, yeah, you're right. There's this balance between how can we standardize and versus where does the creativity need to go? And I think you want to save the creativity for the actual work and the exciting things that agencies are doing. You don't want to have to put so much thinking into the sales process and acquiring clients, which I think a lot of agency owners exhaust a lot of energy behind, but it's misdirected. It's not energy towards like building great relationships. It's energy towards like spreading themselves way too thin, putting energy into prospects that will never turn into clients and things like that. So you're right. I think there's this balance of like, yes, we're creating some standardization, but then also allowing them to put their creative energy into the things that really matter and bring them joy as an agency owner and their team joy as, agency talent.
Yeah, and it's a lot of the times I think it goes back to that sort of like flashlight versus laser pointer sort of metaphor or whatever it is. Like you could have the same energy that has a laser that can cut through metal versus just doing nothing.
Mhm.
And there's so many outlets for creativity, and I think a lot of the times the best creative outputs come from those constraints. And this isn't just in
Yeah.
the agency space, but like you see it in writers' rooms or in bands or whatever. So that makes a lot of sense. So I guess to kind of bring this to Waverly, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing from a high level, and then just kind of like if you're taking an agency through your program, like what the first 30 days look like?
Yeah. So I've really kind of backed myself into this little niche, which is like, I really want to work with agency owners to set the foundations for growth. I originally, my background was in biz dev agency side. And when I started my business, I started consulting in a fractional capacity to do biz dev for agencies. But something that frustrated me when I was in house, and then again when I was doing these fractional roles, was I felt like a lot of what wasn't working on the biz dev side was less to do with, the fact that they didn't have leads, but more to do with they didn't have foundations that when they got those leads was making it possible for them to close them, whether it was a vague positioning or a lack of a defined niche or their pricing wasn't really clear and transparent. There were all these things that were kind of out of my control when I was on the biz dev side. And so I started getting much more involved in the business foundations. And I think that was like it re energized my career and it became a new place where I could have a playground to get back into that building mode. So that's really what I focus on now with agencies. They usually come to me at a transition point where they've done it themselves. They built an agency. They're in the mid six-figure range. A lot of them kind of started their agency a little bit by accident. It was like, oh, I was freelancing and then I started hiring people and they didn't really build it with the intention of building a business. And they get to this point where they've sort of maxed out their network, they've maxed out referrals, and they want to intentionally grow, but they don't know how. And that's kind of when I come in, I look at it almost like a house renovation. Like, let's look at what you have and let's figure out what rooms need updating. And I'm not gonna like burn the whole thing down, but I want to figure out what's working for you as the agency owner and your team versus what isn't. And we go through a 4-month process. And when I'm consulting with an agency, kind of going through everything from their positioning, their pricing, and their offer suite, how they're going about biz dev, where they're getting clients, and we kind of like iron all that out. And then my goal is to kind of set them up for success going forward. So that's kind of my focus. I also have an incubator program, which is a little bit more evergreen inspiration, where maybe an agency owner's like, hey, I kind of know what I'm doing, but every now and then I get stuck, or I get stuck in my own head and I want community and I want a sense of what other people are doing. And that's where my incubator serves people. And then I have a podcast called Agency Darlings, which is kind of like free advice for agency owners that are going through it and they want to feel less alone in the process. So lots of different levels in which I'm able to support people through those foundations, but consulting's the most kind of hand in hand.
Cool. No, that makes sense. It's interesting 'cause I think we've kind of hit on some similar dynamics in the agency space. And what I've sort of seen is that the maturity of the agency can sometimes be like orthogonal or detached from the actual like size in terms of revenue or headcount or these other things. Like I'll give some examples. Like there are agencies that we've encountered or worked with that are well into the 7 figures, some occasionally even pushing towards 8,
Mhm.
but are like complete cobbler's children, and that all the business comes from referrals. There's
Yeah.
1 or 2 partners getting all of it. They work with a bunch of different verticals, bunch of different services, don't have a lot of differentiators. And also profit probably isn't that great because they're splitting it with a bunch of partners and they don't have their operational house in order. And then
Yeah.
on the other side, there could be like a high 6 figure, low 7 figure agency that has repeatable sales lead gen processes, has a strong differentiation, specialization, niching,
Yeah.
and they go home on time, maybe work 40-hour weeks or less, right? So
Totally.
uh, I'm trying to bring this to a question, but what are your thoughts on that? And you talked about the foundations. Maybe a good way to segue is like, what do those foundations tend to look like?
Yeah, you're totally right. Like there is agencies on the side of seven figures that you get in there and it's a shock that they're able to work with some of the brands they work with because it's total chaos in house and vice versa. There's agencies under seven figures that are so tightly run. Me personally, I'm focused on six-figure agencies, though I've, occasionally worked outside of that because there's some statistics around less than 2% of creative agencies are owned by women and less than 2% of women-owned businesses in general make it to seven figures. So that became something very early on was a focus for me. I want to help more women successfully run agencies and I want to help more women get to seven figures. But that's not to say agencies beyond that don't have challenges with their foundations. You're completely right. And I think at every growth stage, you're facing challenges again. Like sometimes you have your kind of formula figured out, and then you hire two new people, and your sort of like equilibrium is completely thrown off, and you need to reset some things again because you have higher overhead or, the dynamics just different internally. So I kind of see growth as like it's a job that never stops. It's kind of part of what you're signing up for as an entrepreneur or a business owner. You don't get it figured out and then you're done. You can kind of coast. Like it's always a job business is a living thing and it's like raising a kid, you have to going to go through different stages and you're kind of always trying to figure it out and do your best. But yeah, my focus is in that niche because I feel like it's really important for more women to come into this creative industry and have ownership and have more weight in the conversation.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the revenue is like an easier measuring stick than other things. So
Yeah.
totally get that. So in your bio, you kind of mentioned, the idea of rethinking the traditional agency model. Can you
Yeah.
talk more about that? Like, how would you describe the traditional agency model and what do you think is wrong with it?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is like a bigger industry conversation and it's been a long time coming. But I think, particularly coming out of the pandemic, there were a lot of dynamics that were in place prior, but got sort of blown out of proportion post pandemic. So, even just at like a simple level, the agency client dynamic, that relationship has been, in my opinion, completely the power shift is out of whack. We went from, and I was agency side through that transition, but we went from having fairly balanced and respectful partnerships with our clients to this dynamic where we bend over backwards for whatever the client wants. We're constantly in a position of negotiating our fees down and cutting into our profit margin. We're taking work that we normally wouldn't have. And I'm seeing that on a kind of like industry wide, a trend happening where agencies have lost so much power in that relationship dynamic. And I don't blame the clients. I think it's equally the client and agencies. Agencies are giving that power away consistently by agreeing to things that they know they can't deliver on or accepting terms that are not in their favor. And I'm not saying it's an easy thing to unpack because look, at the end of the day, like we have to pay our bills and sometimes you're weighing up like I need to pay payroll, but I know this isn't a great decision, but I have to make it for the temporary. So when I think of the traditional model, I think of some of those things that have made margins really small and have created this dynamic in the industry that honestly isn't working for anyone. Clients aren't happy, talent's not happy, they're quitting their jobs left and right, and the agency owner isn't happy either. So it's something's not working there and I don't necessarily have the answer, but I'm forever curious in terms of how can we reinvent this? And I think there's some interesting trends happening around agencies productizing their offers into solutions as opposed to services. You're seeing, just new models pop up in terms of subscription models, and you're seeing more kind of a move to collectives and contractor teams as opposed to full-time teams. So I'm really interested in kind of like all those things that are happening and finding creative solutions to the model that isn't quite working for anyone.
There's a lot of places to go with that, and it's a super interesting topic. And I can kind of speak to our experience a little bit with it.
Yeah.
So, I come from the agency space as well, and then have had essentially a service business from 2014 until give or take a year ago. And we, in the new biz lead gen space, we're basically a done for you lead gen organization for agencies. And we got to a point where we basically said, this isn't really that fun to scale because every time we want to scale, we've got to go hire a really expensive person. And then if we go down, we've got to let that person go. And that's a totally valid game to play for a lot of our clients, but we just weren't interested in that.
Yeah.
And also, like, we got to a point where it's like, we're pretty good at this. We were getting good results, but we're like, our clients, this is kind of an important thing to own. Like, it's not really a great thing to rent. And it's the lifeblood of the business. It's the oxygen of the business. And also, like, we kind of think our clients are going to be better at this than us. And even though we're pretty good at it, like, once they learn it, they're going to be better. So it's like, not really that fun for us, not really that fun for our clients. So we pivoted the business. And what's interesting about the whole like power dynamic, we're not an agency per se, but it's close enough. It's like a service business. Is that there's all these things that we do, or that I've, projecting all these things that I've done to like find the right fit and say no to people. And if this isn't the right fit, walk away. And the only thing that I've really found to work is by truly having the financial ability to easily say no. Like all the like Stuart Smalley look in the mirror, all the rubric stuff for the right client, like that all helps. It's great. But being able to have the expenses low enough and to not have that payroll pressure and like intentionally leaning down the company enough to be like, I can really say no to anyone I want to, and it's not a big deal is the only thing that's been powerful for me. And I think that that's not random or by mistake, because it was also the hardest goddamn thing to do, which was to get the company smaller and to get it where it needed to be. But let me put that back on you. Like, what's been your experience with that, and what are you seeing with your clients?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's not about having this, like, when I was agency side, we had like a rubric, and you could always justify why it was worth taking a client at the end of the day. What I like to do with my clients is really figure out, like, what is the business you actually want to run? Because to your point, like, you figured out through scaling this business, like, we don't really want to scale this business. And I think a lot of my clients will go down that path, but continue to follow it. And they start resenting their business, or their business isn't giving them what they want at the end of the day. So when I'm working with them, I'm like, what are we building? What's the business you want to run? Because if you're a founder-led organization, like, your heart's got to be in this. Like, you're putting sweat equity into this business. So when I'm thinking about helping them say no, it's because, like, we're setting the foundations for the business around the way they like to work on their terms, the kind of clients they want to work with. And once they have the clarity of that vision, it makes it really easy to look at someone who doesn't fit that and be like, hey, like, you seem great, but you're not what we do. We don't focus on that. So I can refer you to a friend over here. The other piece of it is, like, when you are really clear on your financial goals and how you're going to get there, which I map out with my clients, anyone that doesn't quite hit that threshold, you're paying for it, basically. If a client comes to you and they say, I don't have, let's say, your project's, for a certain service is 30,000. I only have 20. And you kind of agree to do that. That 10K, like, you're going to have to make that up somewhere else. And when you're presented with you have your financial goal and you have your path to get there, you start looking at leads through that lens of, is this someone who's going to help me get closer to my goal, or they're just going to actually make me pay for it in other ways? I'm going to have to now double down and get an extra lead and take on more capacity. And when it's one client, it doesn't seem like a big sacrifice, but most agencies are doing that with every client. So now, like, that problem is amplified, and you're never going to get out of that hamster wheel. And I've lived that agency side. Like, it's a never ending thing. You're going to burn out. Your team's going to burn out. So when you're really thinking about, like, is someone a good fit for me? It has to be rooted in your actual goals and the vision for the business you really want to build, as opposed to what you think it should be or what other models look like. At the end of the day, we're humans and we have preferences, and we have to, if you're building a founder-led organization, it has to come from you and your passion and what you want to do. And I think once you have that clarity, it makes it a lot easier to weed out what's worth your time and what isn't. Time is finite. We can't create more of it. So you have to be really diligent and intentional with where your time goes as a founder.
For sure. Yeah. And so you talked about kind of starting with what you want to build and then deciding, what clients are going to fit that. I think one of the biggest topics that comes up on the show is specialization, and we all kind of beat the drum about focusing on one vertical or focusing more intentionally about the services the agency should provide.
Yeah.
Can you talk about like what does that process actually look like for your clients? How long does it happen? If I'm in going through that and I'm worried about losing everything because I've made the wrong choice or I picked this industry and it blows up tomorrow, like
Yeah.
crypto did a few years ago or whatever.
Right.
How do you think about navigating that?
Yeah, I think niching is so critical. And I know like some people just want to tune that out. I don't think niching has to be an industry, and I don't think it has to be a service. It's about having specificity and intention behind who you work with and what you do best. And I think that is about knowing yourself. And, if you're in the very early stages of building an agency, you may need to try a couple things to see. Maybe you don't know what you like and don't like. And I think, do that exploration. But when you get to a point where you're like, okay, I want to get to $1 million, I want to grow and scale this thing, you want to get to a place where there's specificity around what you do and who you do it for. Now, who you do it for doesn't need to be, we only work with crypto CMOs in the crypto space. It doesn't have to be so specific to an industry, but it does need to be specific in terms of, is there a specific problem you solve? Like, we solve this for companies at this stage. Or is there some kind of through line? If you work across a couple industries, what is the through line? It has to make sense. Because the other thing is I'm looking at everything from a sales perspective. A client going to your website and they're seeing every industry there, it's not impressive. It actually just looks like you take whatever you can get. It can be overwhelming to them. They're looking for experts. They're not looking for jack of all trades. They're certainly not going to pay a premium for a jack of all trades. They're going to pay a premium for an expert. So you have to decide as the agency owner, what do you want to be the expert in? What do you want to be known for? And then in terms of what you're offering, like really, I know agencies like to say they can do all these things, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. You really need to figure out what are the things we excel on that we get constant feedback from our clients, like, oh my God, you guys blew me out of the water. Do that. Just focus on that. And it's less about what you're losing, it's more about what you're gaining, because what you find when you specialize is you can increase your pricing significantly because you're differentiated and you're a specialist, as opposed to we do all those things. And yes, you're monetizing maybe a bunch of services, but I promise you 80% of your revenue is probably coming from 20% of the services you offer. So figure out what those 20% that is, and really double down on that. And you'll find everything from your internal processes can simplify to like who you need to hire is a lot easier. Like everything gets easier once you hone in, who to market to, who to network with. It simplifies things. So I think in your first few years, play around, experiment, but get to a point where you're like, when you want to scale and grow, you have to choose a specific audience and a specific problem you're solving, or, set of problems you're solving for them.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing that happens is like you have to take some risk
Yeah.
because every single business that's ever been successful has taken that risk and making that jump. The difference is most other businesses do it much earlier. And you can, right?
Exactly. And I also tell my clients, like, this doesn't have to be forever. If you do this for 6 months to a year and you realize we hate working with fintech companies, if that was your focus, change it. Parlay that into, okay, if our fintech experience really lends itself well into highly regulated industries, and that becomes your niche. Like, you can always make pivots. Nothing is forever. But I don't think that's an excuse to be indecisive and to say you're for everyone just
Yeah.
because you don't want to make a decision. Like, the hard truth is, as the founder, it's your job to make decisions, and you're doing everyone a disservice, including yourself, by being indecisive in that area specifically.
Yeah, makes sense. Related to that, so you've been in a biz dev role, I think, for a long time, for 13 years, and
Yeah.
so for a lot of clients, especially at that six-figure level, what they're usually looking at is owner-led sales, right? And the owner's
Mhm.
kind of doing that along with other things. In your experience, like when do you know that you're ready to hire a salesperson?
Definitely not at the six-figure level, is my strong opinion. And I don't think you're ready to hire someone as a founder unless you've done it yourself and you know what it entails and you've figured out kind of the formula that works for your agency because every agency is different, right? And I've seen agencies hire people way too early. They haven't gotten to that place where they have traction. It's a well-oiled machine and they're hiring someone in and they're expecting that person to fix their business problems. And that is not that person's job. So you need to have the clarity. You need to know what works before you bring anyone in. And then the other thing I'll say on that is like, once you do bring someone in, because I have worked directly with founders as their head of biz dev, I think what's key is that again, as the founder, you still need to be driving the vision for the business. You still need to be setting the goals and playing a role in the sales process as a founder led agency because people are hiring the agency likely, strongly likely because of you. So if you're completely looking to not be involved, I just don't believe in that as a founder led agency. Like you are always going to be involved in sales. Can you hire someone to support you and to help nurture and all the the stuff that goes into the sales process? Absolutely. But you need to figure out as the founder, what is the part in the process where like I show up and I'm magic? I'm going to own that. And then I can hire someone to support me on all the other aspects of the sales process. But, that is a different answer for everyone. Some agency owners are incredible, captivating speakers. Others are great writers. So, there's different ways you can play a role in the process of generating leads and bringing business into it. But yeah, I've heard too much, especially from six-figure agencies. Like, I can't wait till I get this off my plate. And I'm like, hold up. Like, that's part of your job as the agency owner and always will be. And no one you hire is going to care more about your business more than you do. So just like know that you can hire a great committed biz dev salesperson, but it's your business at the end of the day. You have to have ownership of it and you can use that person to support you. Yeah, you can't think of it as like, great, I don't have to worry about this anymore.
Yeah, I've sort of started using the metaphor. I don't know if you've ever been surfing, but it's almost like that, where it's like usually when you're new to surfing, you mess up not because like you paddled too much, it's because you paddled just early enough, and then like you missed the wave.
Oh, gotcha.
Where it's like you have to get to the point where it's like you have leads predictably enough, you have the value prop a little bit more nailed than you think you should, because like it's all going to have to be very ironclad and like well put together.
Yeah.
Or that person who's not going to be as good at closing, they're not going to care as much, right? And
Right.
even if they are really good and professional. So
Absolutely. And you want to make sure their time, like if you are investing in hiring someone, that like you're investing their time in areas where it counts. So if give them a list of 10 verticals, it's like you're not going to get results. They're just going to be treading water and trying to do a bunch of things, but they're not going to actually get anything from that. So, yeah, I think you have to, have focus and then realistic expectations. I've also heard like, I've had this salesperson in 3 months, we haven't seen anything. And it's like, okay, well, first of all, what were they walking into? Like, did you have anything for them to build on, or are they building relationships from scratch? And then you have to like gauge your expectations to the job at hand. It's not 3 months and you give them a list and you're pulling in business left and right. It just doesn't work like that.
right. I think a lot of the times, and I've made this mistake myself, but what we see is people giving very entrepreneurial missions to salespeople, where it's like basically figure out our value prop, figure out the
Yeah.
messaging that works for our value prop, figure out where we're strong in the market and where we're not. It's like that's not a salesperson's job. That's the entrepreneur's job. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. That's the piece that you need to own, like the guiding light. This is my vision. This
Right.
is where we're going. This is what I know, the market wants from us. This is what people respond to. That's not a salesperson's job to figure out.
Right. And a
Absolutely.
salesperson really shouldn't, they should have to get some leads themselves, but mostly they should have systems for getting
Agree.
leads.
Agree. Like the agency should be doing marketing or some form of like inbound that's creating and driving that lead that they can then go vet and, nurture and all that. Totally agree with that.
That all makes sense. So to shift gears a little bit, so you have this incubator, and I want to bring this up because I think it's relevant to agencies, especially if they might be looking to specialize. When
Yeah.
you get the objection that says, well, I don't know, what if there's competitors in the group that are going after my verticals? What do you usually say to that?
Yeah, I usually say to that, first of all, if you have clarity on what you do great as an agency, like your competition is far less, right? Because instead of competing with everyone, you should be competing with a far smaller set with a defined niche and an expertise. The other thing I think is really important for agencies that are in that six-figure, early seven-figure stage is like partnerships. Like you need partnerships with complementary providers, and you need peers you can talk to and exchange ideas with. And if you're closing yourself off and putting yourself in a box and me against the world, like it's just going to be a really hard journey for you to grow, because at the end of the day, clients are working with multiple agencies. They're not exclusive to one. So you have to learn to, build relationships in this industry. And I think there's a lot we can learn from each other. I have worked in environments where every agency around you is competition, don't talk to anyone, and you close yourself off to learning and hearing and responding and collaborations. And so I don't think anyone should look at anyone as competition. I think if you know what you're about, you know who your ideal client is, you can, open yourself up to there's a lot of opportunities out there. You should have this abundant mindset that like truly there is endless work out there. And as long as you know your place in the world, like you're just not as threatened by what other people are doing because you know you're building something that's different. And granted, you're not going to be the only one doing what you do, but again, like when you have the specificity, your competition is narrowed significantly and you become a lot more confident in like, this is who we're for, this is what we do great. If that's not what this lead needs, happy to send them to somebody else. Like I'm just, even you and I, like I don't, I see more opportunity for collaboration and partnership than I do competition. And I also know that like it's a people business at the end of the day. And like people are going to be attracted to different coaches and consultants and agencies. Like they want to learn from different personality types. And so, yeah, as long as you're owning who you are, I don't believe in like shutting the world out and making your world really small. I think there's far too much to learn and you're missing out as an agency by doing that.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something that, like, as the problem you're solving gets more and more narrow, then you actually kind of have more abundance because you know, like, the chances of you coming up against that direct loggerheads issue are just less, and there's probably more loss to be gained from worrying about it.
Exactly. And you get more comfortable with like, I don't have to solve all the problems. I'm just going to solve this problem. And hey, this person's great for solving that problem. But, you don't become so like, I need to own it all because you can't. It's
Right.
impossible.
Yeah, and trying to will make you go insane. So,
Yeah.
uh, well, so
True.
this has been awesome. I guess just like kind of getting towards the end of our time. Like, what are you working on over the next few months, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, I mean, so I launched my podcast agency Darlings in October, and that has been the most exciting thing I think I've done in my business so far. Just been it's been a way to like open up myself to a bigger community of people that can't always work with me in, a consulting capacity, but can learn from me and I'm learning from them. And so that's been so rewarding. We're wrapping up season 1 right now, going into season 2 in January. So that's super exciting. I'm relaunching the incubator in January. So right now working on kind of getting people back into it through a biz dev challenge. I like to do these challenges that make biz dev more creative and can bring people into it in a fun way. Cause I get it. Biz dev and consistent biz dev as a founder can be draining. So I like to bring creativity and fun to it. So I'm doing a challenge in January for the incubator. And yeah, I don't know. Right now I'm open to possibilities. I never would have imagined 2024 would have landed me where it landed me. So I'm like excited for where 2025 will take me, but I always just let myself be guided by like what am I energized by? Where can I add more support to my community of people? And yeah, the possibilities are endless. It's been a great year and it's a great way to end the year chatting with you about all the things I love.
Yeah, likewise. That's great to hear. And then lastly, where can people go to follow what you're up to and get in touch and all that good stuff?
Yeah, best place to follow me is on LinkedIn. I'm posting content on there almost daily. So Melissa Lohrer on LinkedIn. On Instagram, our podcast channel is pretty active. So at Agency Darlings, and then any other way you can find me. I'm in a lot of places, but respond to everything. So wherever you can find me, reach out.
Awesome. Melissa, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.